Hi and welcome back to Joel's DIY. Back again with another video. This time around we're going to go ahead and start covering the 80s. The 80s I have quite less few albums than the 70s and 60s. So I've actually basically split them up into two categories. One category will be my rock stuff, so straight 80s rock. And the other half will be all the other genres. It'll be pop, it'll be hip hop, it'll be funk. So I'm going to cover that in another video. But today we're just going to start off with the rock albums that I have for the 80s. One thing I wanted to mention is that I apologize for delaying this video. But I had a lot of things going on the last couple of weeks. Been pretty busy at work. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first album that I got here is 38 Special Forces. This album I just recently got, and namely I bought it based on my experience with some of their music, but I have not had a chance to listen to this album, so I'm going to when I have a chance. I have lots of albums. I have too many albums that I don't have enough time to listen to all the ones that I've never heard of. So, but yeah, that's a good picture of the cover. Typical kind of 80s. It's not a gatefold, so it's not, yeah. And there's the back of it. Next up is a band that I am familiar with, and that is AC/DC. Now, I'm pretty sure that some of you might be saying, well, you know, this album wasn't released in the 80s. Well, yes, that is correct, but I've tried to keep all the AC/DC albums together. That way they're easier to find. I think their main albums were released in the 80s anyways. Yeah, so yeah, the AC/DC 30 Deeds Done Cheap. So I've always kind of thought that the album cover was pretty funny. And there's the back of it. So yeah, I mean, we got some classics here. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Big Balls. Problem Child, Rocker. There are going to be some Rockin', Right On. So yeah, lots of classic tracks here. AC/DC Dirty Deeds Done Cheap. So yeah, so this is for those about to rock AC/DC. This is a gatefold album, so I'll go ahead and show the inside of it. And that's the album from the inside. Okay, and it's got some classic tracks here. Obviously, for those about to rock, We Salute You, Evil Walks, Spellbound, Breaking the Rules, Snowballed. Lots of classic tracks here by AC/DC. Next up is the debut album, AC/DC High Voltage. This is a great debut album. I really enjoy listening to this. Got this a couple of years ago and love to play this on the turntable because it's still really good. Obviously some classic tracks here. It's a Long Way to the Top. If You Want to Rock and Roll, I think that's probably one of my favorite songs from the album. Live Wire. TNT, I think it's my second favorite song from the album. High Voltage. So yeah. And I think it's kind of hilarious. I don't know if people can see the back of this, but I don't know if these were mock fan letters, but they have a bunch of fan letters with a bunch of funny anecdotes in them. And if you ever get a chance to see the back of this album, it's pretty funny. Next up is one of my Bruce Springsteen's albums from the 80s, and it's got to be Born in the USA. I can't say that I'm a huge fan, but I definitely like this album very much. Probably not his best album, but it's probably his album that's most well known. Born in the USA, Working on the Highway, I'm on Fire, Dancing in the Dark, Glory Days. So lots of classic Springsteen's tracks here. Back in the day, this album cover was actually a little bit controversial because some people thought that it looked like Springsteen was urinating on the flag. I don't think he is, but that's what some people thought of the picture. So I thought that would be kind of like fun trivia there. Next up is an album that I have not heard from Springsteen, but it's the one that I've heard is probably his better of the two albums he released in the 80s that I have, and that's Nebraska. I've heard a lot about this album. Don't know much of the songs here. I think I've heard Johnny 99 before, but don't know any of the other tracks here. There's the back of the album. So I'm sure it's a good listen. I just haven't had a chance to listen to this. But next up is Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms. This is kind of like a classic 80s album. Obviously some great guitar playing from Mark Knopfler. So you got Brothers in Arms. You got Money for Nothing. I think that's probably the song that they're best well known for. And there's a look at the back of the album. Here's another Dire Straits album, and it's Making Movies. Now I have to be honest, I haven't listened to this album yet. I did like Brothers in Arms, so this is mainly why I bought this. But I have not listened to this album yet, so I couldn't recommend any tracks. But not much creativity there for the album cover, unless there's some kind of hidden meaning behind it. But yeah, Dire Straits, Making Movies. Next up is an album released by one of my favorite bands from the 70s. This is kind of like a reunion album. And I have to be honest, I probably only heard it once because I wasn't really too impressed by it. Maybe I need to give it a second listen to. But it is Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. So this is the album where the band, or some of the original members got back together and decided to do a reunion tour and made a new album, Perfect Strangers. I heard the title track, Perfect Strangers. It's on the greatest hits. And yeah, I mean, it's an okay track. I probably need to give this another listen to kind of get more into it. There's the back of it. Just a good picture of the band. So yeah, Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. Next up is Def Leppard, the debut album. So On Through the Night. So this is, the album they released before Pyromania and all those great classic 80s albums. I really am a huge fan of the 80s rock. I think it's probably one of the best eras just in music other than the 60s and 70s. Because there was a lot of great music released at that time. I can appreciate the 90s harder rock, but to me, kind of like the best era has got to be the 80s because there was so much to choose from. So On Through the Night, this is not a great album, and it's okay. It's got some, a couple of classics here. Let's see, Hello America. It's kind of like the first single I think that was released from this album. Rocks Off, It Don't Matter. So there's a good picture of the front, and there's the back. Good picture of the band. Next up is an album I'm definitely fans of, and that is Def Leppard, Pyromania. It was a miracle that I found this at a Goodwill because I thought it would be one of those records that would never pop up. But I'm glad it did because definitely one of my favorite 80s albums from that era. I mean, you got Photograph. You got Rock, Foolin', Rock of Ages, Too Late for Love. So, yeah, classic 80s album. I think this album was almost #1, but it got beat out by Michael Jackson's Thriller. So, obviously, that's a pretty good feat for this album to be that popular during this time. So, yeah, Pyromania. And then there's the back of the album there. Next up is an album that I haven't had a chance to listen to. I think I listened to a couple of tracks, and that would be the Everly Brothers EB84. So I mean, as you know from my 50s video, I am a fan of the Everly Brothers, and I picked this up because I was kind of curious to see what they would sound like when they got back together in the 80s. I heard On the Wings of a Nightingale. That's a pretty good song. But I have not listened to all of the album. So got to give it another listen to. I heard a lot of people quite enjoy this album. I just haven't had a chance to listen to it. Next up is an album I picked up recently, and I listened to from beginning to end when I first got it, and that was Extreme Pornography. So there's the back of it. So, I mean, this is an album that I've seen on CD plenty of times, but I've never seen it pop up on vinyl, so I picked that up right away. Obviously, the single here from this album was More Than Words, which is a very popular kind of power ballad type of song, released in the early 90s. This is technically a 90s album. Yeah, 1990, so this is actually should probably be in my 90s pile. I don't know why I put it here. But yeah, and some of the other songs of note, so Decadence Dance isn't bad. Gotta Get the Funk Out is okay. The album track, Pornography, is okay. So I mean, there's a couple of good tracks here. But yeah, Extreme 2, Pornography. Next up is an album that I guess it was okay, but it kind of fell short of my expectations because I thought, you know, we'd hear some good music here. I mean, it is good. It's just not to the level. But I guess if you have to follow Led Zeppelin, it would be probably hard to do. So the album that I mean is Mean Business by The Firm. So if you don't know who this band is, this is a band that Jimmy Page put together in the 80s. And I think it was Paul Rogers in it. And I don't know who Julian Mendelssohn is. And Jimmy Page. So yeah, I've heard a little bit of the album and I just wasn't all that into it. You know, I might need to give it another listen to. But yeah, The Firm. Next up is a band that has, I guess most of their albums were from the 70s, but they really, I think, got really popular in the 80s. I'm going to go ahead and just pull the bunch out. So the band that I'm talking about is Foreigner. And here's the debut. This was released in the 70s, obviously. Yeah, there's a good look at the album cover. There's the back of it. So, great album here. Cold as Ice. Feels like the first time. Star Rider. Long, Long Way from Home. At War with the World. Fool for You Anyway. So a lot of good tracks here. Then the next album is Foreigner, Double Vision. And I think this would probably be my favorite album from the whole lot of albums from this band. Obviously you got the title track, Double Vision, Hot Blooded, Back Where You Belong, Lonely, Spellbinder. And there's a good look at the back of it. Okay, and the next album that I have here is Foreigner, Head Games. A lot of people don't really like this album. I haven't heard all of it. I heard obviously the title track, Head Games, but Dirty White Boy is another song that's pretty well known from this album. But I have not had a chance to listen to this from beginning to end. But I do like the album covers. Kind of cool. Kind of reminds me of an 80s slasher flick. And there's a picture of the back of the album. Alright, and next up is Foreigner 4. So a lot of people say that this is their best album. So it's got some good tracks here. Jukebox Hero, Urgent, Woman in Black. Waiting for a Girl Like You is kind of like the big single from this album. So I mean, yeah, I mean this is a pretty decent album, but I kind of just like the harder rocking of Double Vision versus this album. So, but it's a very good album. And last up is the album that I would say is probably like my least favorite of the Foreigner albums, and that's Agent Provocateur. This is when they really got just pop, and obviously they have the song I Want to Know What Love Is, which is definitely not my favorite. I kind of just always switch the radio station when that song is playing because it's so cornball. In my opinion, I know that there's some people that like that song, but to me, it doesn't do anything for me. I have not gotten a chance. Probably I've been discouraged because of the song, you know, I Want to Know What Love Is. So I haven't had a chance to listen to the whole album. I probably should give it a fair chance because there are probably some good tracks here. I do like the cover art. It's kind of textured right there. I don't know if you can feel that. And it's textured from the back as well. And let me see, is this a gatefold? No, it's not a gatefold. So yeah, my least favorite Foreigner album, Agent Provocateur. Next up is an album that I have very fond memories of because I used to watch the video all the time when they used to play it on VH1 and MTV. And that would be George Harrison, Cloud 9. This is probably, you know, maybe his second or third best album, in my opinion. Love the music from this album. Cloud 9 is a great song. That's What It Takes. This Is Love, When We Was Fab. The Devil's Radio. I think probably my favorite song from the whole album is Someplace Else. It's just a very good George Harrison track. You know, he's got the slide guitar playing, and the words are I love the lyrics. I think I love everything about that song. So I would probably say that's like my favorite song from the whole album. And obviously the single here was Got My Mind Set on You. So yeah, great 80s album. One of my favorites. And here is the back of it. You can see that there. And the front. So yeah, George Harrison. Next up is a pretty major album for this band in the 80s, and a lot of people have it in the top 5 of the best albums that were released in the 80s, and that would be Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. Not much can be said about this album. Over the years, it's mildly overrated in my opinion, because, you know, there are a lot of other great albums that were released in the 80s. This is, I guess, would be, you know, harder edge kind of rock that became very popular in the late 80s. And obviously, Welcome to the Jungle, Night Train, Mr. Brownstone, Paradise City is the big track, My Michelle. Sweet Child of Mine is probably the most played song from this album, I would say. But it did have a lot of great tracks. I just think it's becoming a little bit overrated. But it's aged well. It's still one of the great albums from the 80s. Just probably would not be my number one like a lot of people would say it would be. Next up is Heart. And this is their self-titled album from the 80s. So this is definitely a time where the band took a completely different direction from the harder rock 70s sound that they had. It's definitely a different type of, I think you get a little bit of some synths and stuff like that in here. It's still a decent album. Looks to Kill, What About Love, These Dreams is, I think, probably the major single from this album. So I mean, it's okay. You know, it's hard. You know, they never really put out any bad music. So there's a cover of the band looking very 80s, and there's the back of it. Okay. Okay, next up is a couple of albums by the same musician, and that is John Cougar Mellencamp, Scarecrow. Okay, I'll be honest with you, I've only really listened to the singles from his album, so I haven't had a chance to really listen to the lyrics. I know he writes really good lyrics. You know, I like his take on Middle America and things like that. So what stands out from this album? So Rain on the Scarecrow is a pretty good song. Small Town's pretty good. So yeah, you gotta, you know, this is supposed to be in the top 2 of his best albums from the 80s. And I do have the other album, John Cougar, American Fool. I think I probably know more songs from this album than the other one. Hurt So Good, pretty classic 80s album. Jack and Diane. So Close Enough, Weakest Moments. So yeah, I mean, I think the plastic here is kind of fading off or tearing off. So this is kind of cool. I just noticed that this actually shows the original price for this album. Yeah, and there's the back of it. So yeah, I mean, a pretty good album. I should probably decide whether or not I'm gonna get rid of the cellophane. I usually try to keep the cellophane because it's part of the album's history. Next up is Journey, Escape. Pretty classic album here. Not much that can be said about Journey, Escape. Don't Stop Believing, you know, big single from this album. Escape, Open Arms, Dead or Alive, Who's Crying Now. So a lot of singles from this album. So Escape by Journey. There's the back of it in case you were wondering. Okay, and then I got a couple more Journey albums. So this is Journey Frontiers. And this is, I think, the album that was released after Escape, I think. Not exactly sure. This is where the band started to have a little bit more tension. Let me see if there's any singles of note. I have to be honest, I don't think I've listened to this album yet. So Faithfully is kind of like the big single from this album. I remember that. Yeah, so I don't, maybe Chain Reaction. I haven't listened to this album, so kind of interesting cover art there. And I know that that's the back of it. So yeah, Journey. Next up is a couple of albums. They're harder rock. I got Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. So I don't have all the Judas Priest albums that I would like to own. So this is just one of the ones that I've been able to be fortunate enough to find at the Goodwill, believe it or not. This is their live album, so it's got Exciter, Ripper, Green Malalishi, Diamonds and Rust, Victim of Changes. So it's a decent live album, I would say. And I also got Point of Entry. So this is, yeah, this is not a gatefold. Haven't listened to this album yet. Let me see. I know that Hot Rocking is probably one of the better known songs from this album. Heading Out to the Highway. So yeah, so haven't listened to this album. So next up is another album I just recently got, and it is London. So I heard of the name before. I don't know if it's the same band that Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue used to be in, but you know, it's something that caught my attention, and the reason why I picked it up is because it is autographed. If you can see right there. This was autographed by someone in the band. I'm not exactly sure who. And I heard some of the tracks on YouTube, but have not had a chance to listen to this. And this album I had not had a chance to listen to. Nico, Drama of Exile. So if you don't know who Nico is, Nico was in the Velvet Underground. She was one of the singers for the album, this album right here. Glad I have the album here. So I picked it up just to hear it. I haven't had a chance to listen to it. So yeah. Next up is Night Ranger. So obviously the track that I'm most familiar with is you know, Sister Christian, because it came out in the soundtrack of Boogie Nights. So that's probably the first time I've heard of this band. I listened to this album maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, and I have not listened to it since. I don't remember if it was good or not, because really I can get into an album if I get repeated listens, and I have not had a chance to do with this one, so I probably need to give it another chance. But it did sound like typical 80s music, you know, the type of music that you listen to driving your Camaro in the mid 80s. So yeah, Night Ranger. Next up is an album that's pretty well known. Not much can be said about it, and that is Pink Floyd, The Wall. And this is, yes, this is my only Pink Floyd album that I own. I recently found this, amazingly at a Goodwill. It's a double album. You know, it's got some big tracks here. Let me see if I can find the track listing. Probably won't be able to. I have to pull the sleeve out. So another brick in the wall. Happiest Days of Our Life. Mother. Nobody Home. Hey You. Comfortably Numb. So pretty important tracks here. So like I said, nothing can be said more about this album. It's not my favorite Pink Floyd album. A lot of people love this album, and I get it because it does have some really good songs here, but I would say that their first, second, third, fourth album was still better than this, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. Next up is Phil Collins' Face Value. This is, I think, the only Phil Collins album that I own, because I'm not a huge fan of Phil Collins. I mainly bought this because I love the In the Air Tonight. I think that's like a classic track. And it's got his face there. I'm not a huge Genesis or Phil Collins fan. I've come across the albums, and I've not really given them a chance, but I just can't really get into it. I like Phil Collins as a singer, but I'm not too fond of the music. So yeah, Face Value. Next up is Quiet Riot, Mental Health. Classic 80s album. There's a good picture of the band. And you know, you got some classic tracks here. Come On, Feel the Noise, Mental Health, Let's Get Crazy, Breathless. So good classic tracks here. I always like the character that they use for their albums. It kind of reminds me of Jason, but it's yeah, pretty cool album. Next up is one of my favorite bands from the 80s, and that is Rat. Love Warren DeMartini, and love the singing vocals of Stephen Pearcy. And this is the debut album, so a lot of people rank this as the best album that they made from all their albums. Wanted Man, Round and Round. I think it's a hilarious video. I think if you haven't seen it on YouTube, you should give it a try. It's pretty funny. Lack of Communication, Back for More, I'm Insane, Scene of the Crime. So a lot of classic Rat tracks here. Next up is another album that I couldn't believe I found in such a great condition at the Goodwill, and that is Rat, Invasion of Your Privacy. So this is a great album. I would say this is probably their second best album. Got a lot of my favorite tracks. I think it's got my favorite Rat song here, Lay It Down. I mean, that is just classic 80s guitar playing there. Love the feel of it. It's just great. It's everything that's great about the 80s, that song right there, in my opinion. So yeah, Never Use Love, Closer to My Heart, Between the Eyes, You Should Know By Now. Also, there's a good look at the back of the album. Make sure I show it. That's a good picture of the band. Classic Rat lineup. Okay, next up is an album that I have to be honest, I'm not quite into, and I think I've only kept it because I like one of the songs here, and that's REO Speedwagon, High Infidelity. And I think it's Keep On Loving You is probably like the song that I kind of liked from this album, but I have not had a chance to listen to the rest of it. It's supposed to be one of their better albums, but I just haven't listened to the rest of it. Next up is the Rolling Stones, and I got Emotional Rescue. And I think this was released in either, yeah, right at the beginning of the 80s, 1980. It's a good album. I enjoy some of the tracks here. I mean, you got Dance, Emotional Rescue is probably the best song from the album. She's So Cold. I still laugh at that video. I think it's funny. Send It To Me. So yeah, so a lot of good tracks here. I quite enjoyed listening to this album. Rolling Stones, Emotional Rescue. And then there's the back of it. And the front of it kind of just looks like a bunch of x-ray scans. So, okay, next up is Rolling Stones, Tattoo You. So this is one of my childhood albums that my dad bought brand new in the 80s, and he used to play it around the house all the time. Always liked that album cover. Like the tattooed face. Looks kind of cool. I don't know if this is supposed to be Mick Jagger or not. I've always wondered that. I don't know who did this. This definitely looks like Keith Richards on the back. But I always wonder if that was supposed to be Mick Jagger. I'm not sure. But anyways, one of their last great albums from the 80s, Start Me Up, is the big hit from here. You got Waiting for a Friend, Slave, Hang on Fire is a great song. I think that's the song that I used to listen to a lot, that my dad used to play on the radio, on the stereo. Worried About You, Heaven. So I think this is probably one of the last great Stones albums. Even though they're still going strong today. But yeah, it's one of my last favorite albums from them. Okay, next up is a couple of albums by the same band. And we'll start off with the big one. Rush. Moving Pictures. So a lot of people rate this as the #1 best album of Rush. And I have to agree, because I think this is my favorite Rush album. This is an album I can listen to from beginning to end. And I don't care if people say that it's been overplayed, but I really enjoy this album. You got Tom Sawyer, you know, basically classic drum solo by Neil Peart. But you also got YYZ, Limelight, Vital Signs, Witch Hunt. I think I like all the songs in this album, so it's definitely a classic. This definitely should be listened to as many times as possible. All right, next up is Sammy Hagar, VOA. So I've only listened to I Can't Drive 55, because this is kind of like the song he's known for. But this is supposed to be like his best album. So yeah, I have not had a chance to listen to this from beginning to end, but I'm pretty sure I'd enjoy it, because I do like Sammy Hagar. I think he was a great fit for Van Halen, and I really don't care what people think about that. Okay, next up is another Rush album. I guess I had this a little bit out of order. This is an import album. I think this was released in Mexico. I am not sure, because some of the tracks are listed in Spanish and in English. But this is like a combination live album, and I think it also has a couple of the tracks from Moving Pictures. So, you got Fly By Night, Making Memories, Bastille Day, Cinderella Man, Overture. You got Closer to the Heart. So I think there's some live tracks here, and I've only listened to this once, but I probably need to give it another listen. So yeah. All right, next up is Scorpions, Love at First Sting. So my sister was the first one in my household to pick this album up, and I really enjoyed it, and I've decided to buy myself a copy. And yeah, it's a great album. Bad Boys Running Wild, Rock You Like a Hurricane is kind of like the big hit. I'm Leaving You, Big City Nights, Crossfire, As Soon as the Good Times Roll, Still Loving You. So I really like this album. Cover art is pretty cool too. I like how the guy's tattooing her while he's making out with her. It's pretty cool. Alright, and then next up is the other Steve Miller Band album that I have. I wish I had the other ones, but this is the one they released in the 80s, and with the big single Abracadabra. And I have not listened to this album. I haven't heard good things about it, but I do know the song Abracadabra, so it's kind of cool. Here's the back of it. A couple of albums by the same band, and that is Styx. Now some of these are going to be together with the albums from the 70s because, like I said, I try to keep all those together. But yeah, Styx. And this is Cornerstone. So this is when they started getting a little bit more commercial. I always like the Styx albums because they always have kind of like interesting cover art. So let's see, what songs are in here? So Babe is kind of like the big hit. Borrowed Time, First Time, Love in the Midnight. So yeah, Styx. And there's the back of it. It's got kind of like opening doors. Kind of reminds me of a folder. Like a school folder. Okay, next up is Crystal Ball, Styx. So good tracks here. Put Me On, Mademoiselle, Crystal Ball, The Old Man. So yeah. And there's the back of it. Next we have I think probably a lot of people say is their best album, and that's Styx Grand Illusion. And the story with this album is that I kept on finding it at the Goodwill, but there was always something wrong with it. It was either really scratched up, or it was missing an album cover, or you found the album cover but no album in it, or it was warped. So I ended up just giving up and buying it from eBay. It wasn't that expensive. It was like a $5 or $10 album. Great tracks here: Grand Illusion, Fooling Yourself, Come Sail Away. It's probably my favorite song from the album. The Grand Finale. And then there's a good picture of the back. I think Styx used to have a lot of good album covers back in the day. Like their album covers. Pretty cool. Alright, next up is Paradise Theater. So I think now we're getting into the 80s. And this album's okay. It's a gatefold, so I'll go ahead and show the front. And the back. Or this is the back, I think. Sorry, I know that the light catches the album, so sometimes it's hard to see. Okay, so Best of Times, I think it's probably like my favorite song from here. And let's see what else we got. Rockin' the Paradise, Too Much Time on My Hands, Snowblind. So yeah, pretty good Styx album. Last up is the concept album, Kilroy Was Here. So I know that you always hear Tommy Shaw talking about how horrible it was to make this album and actually go out there and play it live. And yeah, I mean, you got a harder rock band now doing, you know, theater or musicals, and it was kind of hard for their audience to embrace it right away. Obviously, Mr. Roboto is kind of like the big song from here. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't heard the whole album. I probably should give it a try because I heard the album's okay. But yeah, Kilroy Was Here. And there's the back of it. So you can see them doing the whole musical part of it. All right. Next up is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So this is Damn the Torpedoes. There's a good picture there of Tom Petty with his Rickenbacker. And there's the backside of the album. And yeah, I mean, pretty good album. Refugees, a pretty well-known track here. So what are you doing with my life? Yeah, Even the Losers, Century City, Here Comes My Girl. So a lot of the classic Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers tracks. Next up is Toto 4. So this is supposed to be Toto's best album. A lot of people rank it at the top. And I have to agree because I think this is my favorite Toto album. You got Rosanna. So Rosanna is a pretty popular track from this album. And of course you got Africa. So I get a kick when people cover this song on the internet, but use like a kind of a heavy metal version of it. It's pretty funny, but well, not funny, but it's kind of interesting, I would say. But good for you, Make Believe. Some of the singles from this album. Yeah, it's a pretty. I would say that they're excellent musicians, making pretty good music. And there's the back of it, front of it. Like that cover art. I think the sword has always kind of been a cool thing that Toto does. Okay, next up is Traveling Wilburys, Volume 1. So I've mentioned before that I am a fan of George Harrison's music, and I think this is a great album. Really enjoyed it. I've never been a fan of Bob Dylan's vocals. But I think the fact that he's being backed by Jeff Lynne, you know, Tom Petty, George Harrison, and Roy Orbison, I think kind of helps that a lot. But I mean, you got some good songs here. Handle with Care. I think it's the best song from here, and the single. End of the Line, Last Night, Not Alone Anymore. Heading for the Light, Margarita. So a lot of good songs here. Next up is an album that I don't have the cover, but I do have the sleeve, and that's U2, The Unforgettable Fire. I'm not a fan of U2. I've seen them live maybe about 20 years ago, or no, more like 15 years ago. And I mean, the live show was great when they played all their classic album tracks. But I'm not like a huge fan of their recent stuff, unfortunately, and that's kind of like, I think I stopped listening to YouTube back in 1994 because I'm just not that big of a fan of theirs anymore. But some of the songs from here is, you got Unforgettable Fire, you got Pride. Pride is like the big single from this album. So I just need to find a record sleeve for it. And I should have the complete album, but yeah, Unforgettable Fire. Next up is a couple of heavy hitters. And I would probably say that these, let me kind of get them all together. I would say that this is the best band from the 80s, without a doubt for me. And that would be Van Halen. Now I know that this was released in the 70s. I think it was released in 78. But this album, I would say, was the best album of the late 70s. I would say that. This is just non-stop hard rock, you know, excellent guitar, innovative guitar. You know, this is one of those albums you don't skip a single track. I mean, this is how great it is. There's a great picture there of Mr. Roth. So I would recommend every single track in this album. I mean, I would recommend you sit down and you listen to every single one. Let me see if I get a track. So You Really Got Me is a great cover. Jamie's Crying. On Fire, Running with the Devil. I'm the One. I'm Talking About Love, Little Dreamer. Fuel Your Love Tonight. Atomic Punk. Eruption. This album is tremendous. Ice Cream Man. So this album should be listened to from beginning to end. That's all I'm going to say. Next up is the follow-up, or not the follow-up, but the album they released in the 80s that got them really, really famous, and that is Van Halen in 1984. So this is another classic album. I would say this is like the third or second best album. And obviously you got, let me see if I can get the tracks here. I'm not good at remembering. I mean, no matter how much I like the album, I never remember the tracks. So I'm just gonna not even pretend that I know the names or remember the names. Let me see. But Hot for the Teacher, House of Pain, 1984, Jump, Panama, Top Jimmy, Drop Dead, Legs. So yeah, I mean, this album is another one that you would not need to skip any of the tracks because they're all great. So there's the inner sleeve. There's a good look at the front of the album. And there's the back of the album. So yeah, classic album by Van Halen. Okay, and next up is Van Halen 5150. So this is the transitional album that now you have Sammy Hagar in the band. And absolutely great album. I think Sammy Hagar did a fantastic job taking over lead singer duties for Van Halen. I'm not one of the ones that doesn't like Sammy Hagar in Van Halen. It's a great album. Let me get, for some reason, okay. So I got the album tracks here. So Best of Both Worlds, I think is a great song. Dreams, Love Walks In, Summer Nights, Why Can't This Be Love, Get Up, Summer Nights. I think all the tracks are great here. I think my favorite song from the album is Best of Both Worlds. It's a great album. There's the back of it. And I've also pretty cool front cover. And I like the back because basically the guy wasn't able to carry Van Halen once it hatched, which I thought was pretty cool. Okay, let me go ahead and pull the last couple of albums out. Okay, so next up is Yngwie Malmsteen, Rising Force. So I have unfortunately just gotten this album, so I haven't had a chance to listen to it. I know who Yngwie Malmsteen is. He's a great guitar player. I've just not had a chance to listen to this album. I think this is like his second or third best album. So I need to give it a listen to. There's a good look at the front. Good look at the back. Okay, next up is Yes. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the second album of Yes that I have. This is more like a singles remix album, but this is actually the main album, 90125. A lot of people have mixed feelings about this album. I really like this album. Owner of a Lonely Heart is the big single here, but you also got It Can Happen, Cinema, Our Song, City of Love. So a lot of good tracks here. And there's the back of it. So this was, I think, a reunion album where all the original band members got back together and did another album together. I think it's except for Steve Howe. I think Steve Howe didn't do this album. And there's a good look at the singles. So I guess this is the remix of Owner of a Lonely Heart, which I thought was kind of cool. So I picked it up. And then next up is a couple of albums by the same artist. First one up is Joe's Garage, Frank Zappa. So I have not had a chance to listen to this album from beginning to back, from front to back. Let's see if I can show this gatefold. Yeah. So the gatefold has, I guess, its lyrics. It's got typical Frank Zappa type of art. There's the, sorry I couldn't really show it to you because of the lighting, but trying my best here to show it. Okay. And there's the back of it. So I've not had a chance to listen to this yet. I know it's one of his popular albums. Most people tell me that Act 1 is better than Act 2, so check that out. Next up is Zappa, the Man from Utopia. Pretty cool album cover. And I have not listened to this album yet. I know it was released in the 80s. So that's why I picked it up. So let me see if I know any of the... No, I do not know any of the songs here. So I'll have to give it a listen to. The album tracks are kind of funny, but I couldn't say whether or not the songs are also funny. So, and that is it for the 80s rock albums that I currently own in my collection. Thank you so much for being patient for this follow-up episode. I've been really busy the last couple of weeks, so I wasn't able to film it. But here I have it, and hopefully I can put up the next one up. The next one will cover all my other genres from the 80s. And hopefully we can do the last video of the 90s showing all my albums from that era. So with that said, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.